I love folklore. Bite-sized pieces of a grander mythology, molded and crafted by the lands they haunt, and hold a mirror to the ideals and fears of the people who birthed them. But like people, folklore tends to travel. As the populace moves to distant lands, so do the ghosts and demons that follow them. Before I get too lost in the sauce of poetic waxing, folklore is awesome, and deserves to be celebrated as much as it is, if not more. So, I'll do my part by my favorite folktale figure. No, not you. Miss me with that pelican-looking A. And no, not him either. Despite being super popular in my area, I never saw the appeal of what is essentially a candid footage of a time-traveling Chewbacca. No, my favorite folklore creature is the Headless Horseman.
Ghosts are bad, but the one that's cursed is the Headless Horseman. He's the worst.
If you were hoping for an entire in-depth analysis of the complete history and morphology of ancient folklore, just go to Overly Sarcastic Productions, because you're not going to find that here. I just know a bunch of random information from a cursory Google searches and more than a few probably outdated documentaries. So, yeah, let's get into it. I guess I should start by defining what exactly the Headless Horseman was. Aside from simply being a man on horseback that is, in fact, headless, it's a little difficult to clearly define what makes a Headless Horseman. You'll see why in a minute. Like most people my age, I was introduced to the legend of the Headless Horseman by a Disney classic, The Adventures of Ichabod Crane and Mr. Toad, a two-part short film released in theaters in 1949. Narrated by Bing Crosby. Fun little side note, I didn't know this, but apparently there was a huge rivalry between the fans of Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra. So much so it even went to the playground. When I was talking with one of my more elderly friends about how much I liked Frank Sinatra, she told me a story of when she was at a playground and there were a bunch of kids standing on like the slide or something, and they would ask, Bing or Sinatra? And if you said Sinatra, they wouldn't let you play on any of the toys. You won't find that in any Wikipedia article. The best source is to ask the people that lived it. Anyway, this movie has the most iconic look. A cloaked rider wielding a sword atop a black horse, usually with a flaming jack-o'-lantern to throw at people like a cannonball. Of course, this story is based on The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving, which I have not read yet, but I did listen to an abridged version while working on the art for this video.
If his path had not been crossed by a being that causes more perplexity to mortal man than ghosts, goblins, and the whole race of witches put together, and that was a woman. Among the musical...
In the story, the cloaked rider is said to be a Hessian soldier who got decapitated by a cannonball during the Revolutionary War, and now haunts the countryside of New England. A Hessian soldier, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, was a German soldier that fought for the British during the Revolutionary War. In the American texts, they were called mercenaries, but according to British records, they were actually auxiliary soldiers. Soldiers that other countries would loan to each other during times of war. And since Germany wasn't a unified country at the time, they were called Hessians, referring specifically to German troops fighting on the side of the British. While this most likely doesn't have any basis in actual myths told at the time, it does have all the beats of what makes a good folktale. The Americans may have won their freedom, but they still live in fear of the restless spirits of their fallen enemies. I don't know much about Washington Irving's life, but I do know he did study abroad in Europe, where he probably heard about the ghosts from Germanic folklore called the Revenants, a restless spirit that were cursed to wander the earth until they atone for their sins. While the Revenants are attributed to inspiring the legend of Sleepy Hollow, the appearance of the Headless Horseman seems to closer mirror the Scottish variant of the tale. Except in this Scottish folktale, the horseman has a name. Names that I will butcher unintentionally because Scottish and Gaelic words are so hard for me to pronounce and there's no one pronunciation, so please, before you get on my ass about it, just chill. Ewan McCain? Ewan McCain, the only son and heir to Old John, the 5th chief of the McCains of Lochbury, also known as Ewan of the Little Head. Foreshadowing. To briefly summarize the tale, during the 16th century, in a battle to claim the title of chief, Ewan, atop his horse, charged the front lines of the opposing enemy, leaving himself totally exposed to an enemy fighter who swung their sword and knocked his head clean off his shoulders, leaving his headless body to slump in the saddle as his horse bolted away in fear. So far, the Headless Rider seems to be a restless spirit of either a soldier or warrior that prowls meadows and cemeteries, either seeking restitution or revenge for their past life, and will not stop until they've achieved their goals. These variants were once people, connected to actual historical events, usually a bloody battle on a mission to settle a score. But not every battle gets their own Headless Horseman. If that were the case, Gettysburg would be crawling with entire battalions of Headless Horsemen continuing the fight they died for. So what makes those battles special? Well, for starters, the Hessian soldier was just Irving using his poetic license in telling the children's Gothic horror story. But personally, I think these tales were inspired by a much older mythos, dating back to the 12th century, and perhaps even as far back as the 4th century. An older variant from Irish folklore, the Dullahan, a fae dressed in black driving a coach of 6 headless horses that rides the countryside, appearing at the doorsteps of a person who is close to death. If the name sounds familiar, you may recognize it from Celtsy, the best character in the criminally underrated anime Durarara. Now, the Dullahan, they got the standard fae ops. Creatures of the glen, punishes those who look at them. However, instead of iron keeping them away, a Dullahan is apparently repelled by gold. While some people may think this is a pop culture additive, according to Hidden Ireland and GoToIreland.com, links in the description, having a piece of gold on you, or showing a piece of gold, was enough to make the Dullahan call off their pursuit. Of course, each telling of the Dullahan gets a different interpretation. Some are just headless riders, some hold their heads out like lanterns, some have long whips that strike out the eyes of those who look at them, while others just throw blood at you. It depends on who you ask. Alongside being a fae, it is also believed the Dullahan was a servant of again, I apologize. How the fuck do you pronounce this? Is also related to later mythology. Crom, who is, from what I can tell, the chief god of the pre-Christian Ireland, who was the god of the sun, the zodiac, and demanded human sacrifice in exchange for plentiful milk and grain harvests. Although the human sacrifice bit is still up for debate. What little lore I could find of him, there's nothing to tying him to the Dullahan. Most of his literary references are how St. Patrick beat his ass by breaking all his idols with a sledgehammer. So my theory is that the connection was added after the forced Christianization of Ireland in a way to say, our sun god has become a bringer of death to those who look upon him. But before anyone gets too upset, it is extremely difficult to find any sources that documents authentic Irish folklore and mythology, mostly because there isn't one. Like Norse mythology, very little of the original mythos has survived the bastardization, Christianization of the local legends. All we have are the text of the scribes that wrote down and reworked the stories to fit their version of the Bible. But we also have word of mouth and oral traditions, which is where we get the stories of the Dullahan and why we still even know about them. And that's what makes folklore so fascinating. As frustrating as it is to study and find a true narrative of the times, it ultimately is a fruitless search, because, like I said before, the folklore of the land changes with the folks that live there. See, my previous poetic waxing wasn't for nothing. There's just something so surreal about a headless figure galloping through the night. Whether he was a casualty of war, a lost prince, or a remnant of the old world, the Headless Horseman continues to capture our imagination. From Sleepless in Ponyville and My Little Pony, Headless Houseguest from Batpat, even Marvel Comics has taken inspiration and even confirmed the Sleepy Hollow Horseman was a Ghost Rider. Like, bro, what? I mean, it makes sense, sorta. Both are vengeful spirits that hunt down the soon-to-be dead and have a long chain-like whip. Man, I should design a Ghost Rider Sona. Anyway, ever since I was a kid, the legend of the Headless Horseman has always fascinated me more than any folktale figure. Sorry, Pecos Bill, you're taking a backseat. And I'm not the only one. If you look up Headless Horseman, you get hundreds of amazing art pieces, some of which even showcase the Dullahan, and I specifically typed Headless Horseman. So the connection between them isn't just my crackpot theory. My personal favorite depictions are a mix of Sleepy Hollow horsemen and scarecrows, but I'm biased towards pumpkin heads. Happy spooky season, everyone! Let me know what your favorite folk tales are, and feel free to chime in on any additional horseman/Dullahan myths you know. While y'all are doing that, I'm going to design my very own Headless Horseman/Ghost Rider OC.